Good evening, America, and thank you very much for joining us tonight for a program that I think you are going to find extremely interesting. And the reason for that is that the working families of this country, ordinary people from coast to coast, are facing enormous challenges. And tonight we're going to discuss some of those challenges with a great panel of folks who are living these challenges every single day. For them, this is not some kind of abstract or theoretical discussion. This is what they and their neighbors and coworkers are living. And it's important that we talk about the reality of life in America. But before we hear from our panel of grassroots activists, I want to give some background on the economic situation in our country, a background that you don't see too much on TV and you don't hear too much in Congress, but in fact is of interest, I think, to every working person in this country. The simple truth is, and I cannot say this over, and I will say it over and over again, is that today we have more income and wealth inequality in our country than at any time in 100 years. Now, we don't talk about it very much, but that is the reality. The gap between the people on top and everybody else is wider than it has been probably for at least 100 years. Simply stated, the very wealthiest people in our country are becoming much richer, while millions of working people struggle every single day to put food on the table, to feed their kids, to pay their rent, to get the health care that they need, to put gas in the car. And here is just what has been going on, not just today, but over a long period of time. After adjusting for inflation, the average worker in America is making nearly $40 a week less than he or she made 49 years ago. Think about that. Think about the huge increases in worker productivity that we have seen in the last 49 years. Far more efficient machinery, automation, sophisticated computers, artificial intelligence, you name it. In other words, workers are producing more, but unbelievable, in real inflation accounted for dollars, they have less today than they had 49 years ago. And meanwhile, while working families are struggling, while most families now require two breadwinners to pay the bills. And let me say to young people, I know this may sound extraordinary to you. There was once a time in America, like when I was growing up, that in most families, one person went to work in those days, mostly the man, the father, went to work and was able to earn enough money to take care of the whole family. Think about that. But because of increases, because wages have not kept up with inflation, because of increases in healthcare, in education, and housing, we now need, in most cases, mom and dad, husband and wife, go out to work in order to pay the bills. Meanwhile, while that reality is taking place, while people are working incredible hours, struggling to put food on the table, the people on top, the wealthiest people in this country, are doing phenomenally well, and perhaps have never been so well off in American history. So that is the dynamic of where we are today. Ordinary people struggling. COVID has made that crisis worse. People on top doing incredibly well. Today, the wealthiest person, I want you all to hear this, in our country, Elon Musk, is now worth $243 billion. That is more wealth than is owned by the bottom 40% of our people, some 120 million people. So one guy has wealth equal to what 140 million Americans have. How crazy is that? And the top 1% now owns more wealth than the bottom 92%. Since the Wall Street crash of 2008, about 45% of all new income has gone to the top 1%. You got that? Almost all of the new income goes to the people on top. In other words, over the last many decades, there has been a massive shift in income and wealth from the middle class and working families of the country to the top 1%. In other words, we've seen a redistribution of wealth. People say, oh, we don't want redistribution of wealth. What they're saying is they don't want the rich to be paying more in taxes and helping the middle class. But there has been a massive redistribution of wealth. The problem is it's gone the wrong way. It's gone from working families to the top 1%. And listen to this one, and this really kind of tells you where we are at today. During this terrible, terrible pandemic where we've lost over 800,000 Americans, God knows how many people have been ill, hospitals are being filled up. At a time when many thousands of essential workers died doing their jobs. People working in grocery stores, working in healthcare, working in public transportation. Thousands and thousands of people have died just going to work. But at the same time, some 740 billionaires in America have become more than $2 trillion richer. I got it? Working people forced to go to work, sacrificing their lives, barely getting by, people on top becoming billionaires, becoming $2 trillion richer during the pandemic. And this is the clearest example that I can think of the kind of corporate greed that we are currently experiencing. So workers are struggling while the CEOs and the billionaires who sit in their fancy offices and their mansions, they're doing phenomenally well. And let me just tell you a little bit more about corporate greed. While workers are struggling to pay their bills, send their kids to college, and save up for retirement, if you can believe this, the CEOs of major corporations now make over $350 billion, 350 times as much as their average employees. Got a worker, and the boss makes 350 times more. So that is the reality of what we're facing all over this country. And we're going to be talking about that tonight. But I want people to know that there are some of us in the Senate and in the House in Washington who understand these crises, and we're trying to do what we can to protect working families. And let me tell you, the opposition that we are facing from the big money interests, from politicians, is extraordinary. So I want to briefly tell you what we are trying to do, and that is, a lot of it is captured within the Build Back Better plan. And I know that some of you have heard about it. President Biden has been working on it. I've been working on it. Members of Congress have been working on it. But this is what we are trying against enormous opposition to do. Number one, we're taking on the greed of the pharmaceutical industry and lowering the cost of prescription drugs, because in America, we should not be forced to pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. In some cases, 10 times more for a particular drug than the people in other countries. Furthermore, the legislation that we are working on would expand Medicare to cover dental care, hearing aids, and eyeglasses. Today, in the wealthiest nation on earth, there are many millions of seniors who are unable to afford to go to a dentist or buy the hearing aids and eyeglasses that they need. These are basic healthcare needs that all of our seniors should be entitled to receive. It is no great secret that the United States is becoming an older country like other nations. We are aging. And the result of that is that more and more older Americans and people with disabilities need home health care. These are folks who would much prefer to stay at home around their loved ones than be forced into expensive nursing homes. And the plan that we're working on greatly expands home health care and makes sure that the workers who work in home health care are adequately paid, which is not the case today. Plan we are working on is not only vitally important to seniors, but it is enormously important for working families and their children. Hey, in case you didn't know it, we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. Good news is that as a result of the $300 direct payments that millions and millions of working class parents have received, which began in the American Rescue Plan, we have cut childhood poverty in this country by 40%.
Yeah.
Got that? Childhood poverty has been cut by 40%. That's an enormous achievement. Build Back Better would continue those benefits for years to come. Legislation we're working on also deals with the dysfunctionality of our child care system, which forces millions of working families to spend 20, 30% of their limited incomes on child care and keep over 1 million women out of the workforce. They can't find affordable child care for their kids. And under our plan, no family would pay more than 7% of their income for child care, and pre-K education for 3 to 4-year-olds would be universal and free. Legislation that we are fighting for would make community colleges tuition free. Think about that. And enable our young people to acquire the skills they need to get good paying jobs and meaningful careers. This legislation would end the embarrassment of the United States being the only major country on earth not to guarantee paid family and medical leave. Can you imagine? We are the only major country. There are moms out there who have to give birth, and a week later they have to go back to work because they have no paid family and medical leave. How disgraceful is that? This legislation will make a massive investment in low income and affordable housing so that we no longer have over 500,000 Americans sleeping out on the street and millions more who spend half their incomes on housing. And needless to say, this legislation deals with the existential threat of climate change. With the planet becoming warmer and warmer, with unprecedented fires, drought, floods, and extreme weather disturbances, and when scientists tell us that we only have a few years to avoid irreparable damage to our country and the planet, this legislation begins the process of cutting carbon emissions and transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel. And when we do those things, we create millions of good-paying jobs and offer a much brighter future for our young people. Now, where we are at is that this bill, called Reconciliation Bill, Build Back Better, reconciliation, the same thing, is being opposed by every Republican in the Congress, as well as the drug companies, the insurance companies, the fossil fuel industry, and the billionaire class. They want to maintain the status quo and allow the very rich to get richer. It is also being opposed by 2 members of the Democratic caucus. 48 members are for this. The House of Representatives are for this. 2 Democrats are against it. So here we are with legislation that is enormously popular. Poll after poll shows overwhelming support for every one of these items that I've been talking about. So where we are now is we need your help. We need America to stand up and tell every member of the United States Senate, this is legislation that has got to be passed. So with that, let me now introduce our panel. We have 5 great people who are on the panel. And let me begin with Ana Lilia Mejia, who is the co-executive director of the Center for Popular Democracy. Ana Lilia previously served as the Women's Bureau Deputy Director in the Department of Labor. And full disclosure, Ana Lilia worked with me in my 2020 campaign as the 2020 National Political Director. So she is doing a great job helping to run, I think, the largest grassroots organization in America. So Ana Lilia, thank you so much for being with us. Thanks for all that you're doing.
Thank you, Senator. And obviously, I mean, you hit so many points that I think are critical for just the American people to really understand. One, this is not a game. We're talking about people's lives and health and livelihood, and quite frankly, our entire economy benefiting from the passage of this package, and frankly, other policies that really are critical for working families across this country. As you shared, CPD is a network of different organizations across the country. We are in approximately 48 organizations across 34 states, as well as DC and Puerto Rico. We're in about 200 cities across the country. And the folks that we're working with are at the center of this pain. These are folks who are working class people who are trying to keep like house and home together, body and soul together, better yet. And they need the support of a set of policies and a government that is cognizant that the way we all go forward, the way we all rise, the way our economy thrives is by regular working class people being able to make it. You mentioned the fact that child poverty has gone down. Well, that went down because families had direct cash support that then got right into the economy and kept us from having a complete economic collapse. We also know that there were some measures and there are several measures that are proposed that really will help our families not only find family sustaining work, but also access to healthcare, the ability to care for their families and kids. And it's not a joke. And you mentioned 2 members of the Senate who are treating this as a political game, when in fact, it's life. It's about us being able to make it. So I'm excited to be here, Senator. I'm excited to continue to work with you across this network to really get all of us fired up to make the demands from the field that we really need. I mean, inequality kills, as Oxfam's recent report just noted. You mentioned about, COVID being this moment of incredible transfer of wealth. In that report, in that Oxfam report, they note the 10 richest men doubled their wealth during COVID. At the same time that 99% of the population could barely keep it together. That so many lost their lives, so many lost their homes, lost jobs, and will take perhaps an entire generation, if not more, to recover. And here we have these policies at hand. We know the roadmap that can help. Why are we not all mobilizing to ensure just a little bit more equity, just a little bit more justice? So again, very excited to be here with you, Senator, and we're going to keep fighting. The reality is that, our lives all depend on it.
And Lilia, thank you very, very much. Our next panelist is Mita DeWitt with Alaskans Take a Stand. Mita helped form Alaskans Take a Stand and has been fighting against the dramatic impact of climate change in Alaska for decades. Mita, thanks so much for being with us.
Goodness, cheese, Senator Sanders, for the opportunity to be here. It's truly an honor. Tle ka klenach, Mita DeWitt, yuchat doasak, klinga klenach, zetzinak, yuchat doasak. I am calling in from the unceded territories of the Dena'ina people in Anchorage, Alaska. I am Tlingit. My traditional homelands are the Tongass Rainforest, and I am honored to be nominated by Aaron Jackson to be here today. So I am feeling the weight of needing to represent a lot of people, so please forgive me if I'm a little bit nervous. But Alaska is 20% of the United States landmass, and a lot of people don't realize that. Alaska is also what makes the United States an Arctic nation. Alaska is so large, we have 6 distinct ecoregions, and we have over 229 tribes who have been living in harmony with these spaces for well over 10,000 years. Right now, Alaska is experiencing climate change over 2 times faster than the rest of the United States. This is affecting not only our natural spaces, our physical health, but also affecting our mental health. They now have a term for it called solastalgia, or climate grief. And it's affecting a lot of people. It's that grief after mass wildfires, after we have mass die-offs of our salmon, after we literally have communities falling into the ocean or into rivers because of erosion. We have disruptions in our calving cycles of our caribou and other animals, and we might even lose the polar bear in our lifetime. Everything is changing around us. Our plants are changing. We have invasive species coming in, and our state only has about 750,000 people. So you can't blame us for climate change for our personal use. But what we are responsible for is our extractive resources. Our economy is solely based on oil and gas and mining. And our communities, especially in the rural areas, which is over half of our state, they're dependent on this. Some community budgets are 100%, and the grants 100% dependent on oil and gas. And so if we want to talk about just transition and climate justice and all of these things, we have to listen to the people, the working families. We have some communities where they pay $10 a gallon of milk. They don't have drinking water plumbed into the house. Their communities with their washateries at the schools, like I said, are eroding in some places and even falling into the ocean. So for adaptation, mitigation, and thriving, we have to have safety and stabilization. We have to have equitable and adequate investment so that we can diversify our economies and so that we can guarantee that people can feed their children, can pay for their heating bill. And our Indigenous people have stories of surviving through climate change before. And it was based on sovereignty and ability to navigate and self-determine the actions to get through it well. But we are 95% of our food and goods is shipped in right now into our state. And we have a ferry system in our southeast area that's deteriorating and falling apart. So this bill is going to be part of how we invest into renewable energy, clean transportation, jobs, supporting family, having access to clean water. And I just want to tell America, right now, we are in the midst of an epic migration. If you ever needed a Hollywood moment telling you this is the time is now. We need you. We need that Hollywood moment. We have to transition. And it's not just us, it's all of us. We are the legendary ancestors that future generations are going to look to and say, they did it. We survived. We are alive because they made the choice to invest in the future and our future generations. So, Ganesh Chish.
Mita, thank you very much. You know, it is unbelievable to me that when you have the scientists telling us that if we don't act with incredible boldness in the next few years, the planet, the country that we're going to be leaving our kids and future generations is going to be increasingly unhealthy and increasingly uninhabitable. All right, that's what's happening. And the idea that we are not moving right now in the boldest possible way is beyond comprehension. So thank you very much for the great work you're doing in Alaska. Our next panelist is Robert Lawrence, who is a member leader from the Texas Organizing Project. So we're going from Alaska to Texas. Robert is currently uninsured, does not have health insurance, and has been advocating to expand healthcare access, Medicaid, and for fair prescription drug prices. Robert, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Senator, and thank you so much to Sofia Sepulveda for the opportunity to speak on this important panel. My name is Robert Lawrence, and I live in San Antonio, Texas. I do not have health insurance. I am a contract worker and thus am never eligible for health insurance with my job. I am not alone, though. Many my age are contract workers and have never been eligible to have health insurance. When I was growing up in Texas, my poor family could never get out from under medical debt. My mom has epilepsy and my father had chronic undiagnosed issues. Last year, my father died of COVID because of his poor health. He never got the opportunity to be healthy because the only healthcare he would get was sick care. Sick care is the healthcare of the last resort. This is who is dying from COVID right now. My father never wanted to go to the doctor because of the big bill. Now this is my life too. I don't want to go to the doctor because of the cost. I now just use home remedies. This is not a healthcare system. I'm worried that my fate is similar to my parents. It's become generational medical debt now. The only solution is to expand Medicaid and other healthcare options, which Build Back Better and would ultimately do. And we ultimately do need to get Medicare for all. For young people, we need to be successful. We need stability in our health. I could have a lethal disease, yet never know, since I don't have a family doctor at all. I honestly don't know what else to do. It's ridiculous that you get healthcare from your employer. It leaves so many of us who are self-employed or who work as contract workers or temporary work. We're left without really a good option. The complexity of buying a plan from the market is also a huge barrier. The plans are expensive, always changing, and just impossible to navigate. So while I feel okay, I don't really bother. The plans hardly cover anything anyway. My mom used to spend hours and hours trying to figure out all the healthcare stuff for our family. I remember her on the phone with the insurance companies, fighting for coverage, and now that's my experience too. It hasn't changed. The insurance companies still are constantly denying the healthcare that we need. There's no assurance that they will cover what I need. Now I've joined with Texas Organizing Project to work on the healthcare issues in Texas. Texas has not even expanded Medicaid. Build Back Better would help ensure the people in Texas have Medicaid. Fine. I mean, it's about time. Build Back Better, would actually help the people in Texas. Sick care is not only a tragedy, but a crime of the for-profit healthcare industry against the hardworking people of America. I hope that every hardworking person listening to this can see the need for Build Back Better.
Well, Robert, thank you very much. And the story that you have just told about yourself and your dad and your mom, I'm afraid is a story experienced by tens of millions of people in our country. And in fact, what the corporate media and the establishment very rarely talk about is that in a given year, studies have indicated, if you can believe it, some 60,000 Americans every year die because they can't get to a doctor when they should, or they can't afford the prescription drugs that they need. 60,000 people. God knows how many more get sicker than they should be because they don't get to a doctor when they should. So the story that you are telling speaks to the disgraceful and dysfunctional healthcare system that we have, which leaves us, and I hope everybody understands this, we're the only major country on earth not to guarantee healthcare to all people. I'm talking tonight from Burlington, Vermont. 50 miles north of us is Canada. Everybody has healthcare in Canada as a human right. And by the way, they spend about half as much per capita on healthcare as we do. And that's true all over the world. In most industrialized countries, healthcare is a human right. And that's the fight we are fighting. So Robert, thank you very much for what you're doing. Our next panelist is Chandria Nelson, who is a small business owner. She's a single mother of two, is a member of Space in Action, Spaces in Action, and has been fighting to extend the child tax credit, an enormously important issue. Chandria, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. So yes, my name is Chandria Nelson. I am a mom, college graduate, small business owner, board member of Tyler Elementary School PTA, as well as I'm a member of Spaces in Action. I hold my family, community, and financial security close to my heart. My values are important because they benefit my physical, social, and emotional health. I'm sharing my story because it was devastating to lose my job when the pandemic first began, just for not having adequate childcare. As an essential worker, I did not have the option to work from home. Without childcare, I was stuck, my family home alone, or staying home and keeping them safe. What would you choose? I was able to make arrangements for childcare for a while. That all ended in late 2020. I was fired for missing days. My employer did not empathize with my situation, the willingness to be flexible. I found work again at a salon because I did not have childcare. I brought my children to work with me, which is not really fun to try to take children with you while you're going to work. Don't want to yell. Back in February 2021, I was in a car accident, so I could not continue working. I was hurt, but determined to, still push forward. I took odd jobs that offered the flexibility to care for my children, but I was not able to work full time. I did apply for unemployment, and I was successful, and I was eligible to receive that. Fast forward, let's talk child tax credit. After filing my 2020 taxes, I received my refund and I began to receive the child tax credit. It helped me make ends meet. I was able to catch up on my rent, pay for car repairs. It also allowed me to get my children essential items that they needed, such as clothes, shoes. We were able to buy food also with that child tax credit. We didn't take food for granted. Let's not forget the other necessities that I could purchase, like detergent, soap, toothpaste, toilet tissue. While all this was going on, though, I did finish the Hair Academy at New Carrollton. I received my license in cosmetology and graduated in May of 2021. As we look at the current tax season, families like mine need to receive a CTC. We earned it, we deserve it. Once the payment stopped, a lot of families, we feel the pain of it stopping. Senator Sanders, what else can be done to, kind of add pressure to move the Senate to do its job and to put America's children, families, and communities first? Thank you. I'm Chandra Nelson with Spaces in Action.
Chandria, thank you very much for telling us your story. And once again, like Robert, it's a story being told in millions of homes throughout this country. Congress finally did the right thing by extending and expanding the child tax credit, which meant, roughly speaking, about $300 per month per kid. And that is a big deal when you are struggling to make ends meet. Raising kids today, as I'm sure you will agree, Chandria, is not an inexpensive proposition. And that $300 a month really helped. It has now been ended because we've not been able to pass Build Back Better. And I get so tired of hearing from politicians who tell us how much they love the country, and yet they apparently do not love the children in our country, who are now back to having the highest level of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. How do you have a future for this country if so many of our kids are living in poverty? So, Chandria, thank you very much. Our next guest is Marthella Johnson, has been an organizer in her community in Little Rock, Arkansas. And she has been fighting to make healthcare more accessible and affordable for working families like her own. Marthella, thanks a lot for being with us.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. Again, my name is Marthella Johnson. I am also a member of Arkansas Community Organizations, which is a nonprofit organization that supports low to moderate income communities. I grew up in one of the most violent neighborhoods in Little Rock, Arkansas. So I know the hardships of fighting for a better life. I know the importance of needy families receiving assistance through social service programs. I have worked diligently over the past 15 years helping in the fight for affordable health care, fair and equal housing, and social justice reform. In 2018, I traveled more than 288 cross-country hours to Washington, D.C. over a period of 7 weeks with fellow Arkansans to show our support and share our stories on why Arkansans in Arkansas needed affordable health care. It was a challenging experience, but it was one that was very important in the fight to save the Affordable Care Act, and we were victorious. However, there are thousands of Arkansans that still do not have health insurance, and many more that are at risk of becoming homeless. The COVID-19 pandemic has left a trail of devastation across our nation. And what is worse than that reality is the eviction moratorium ending for low to moderate income families and households. Thousands of families are only hours away from being forced to live on the street and threatened with criminal prosecution. In Arkansas, if a tenant falls behind on paying their rent and the landlord issues a written request for them to leave the premises within 10 days, if that tenant does not leave the premises because they don't have anywhere to go, don't have the money to move, then they can be threatened with criminal prosecution. In Arkansas, a failure to vacate is a criminal statute that authorizes the state of Arkansas to impose fines and other criminal penalties upon tenants who fail to pay rent to their landlords. So imagine having to make the choice of living on the street or becoming a criminal because your job shut down, or you contracted COVID-19, or you encountered a coworker that contracted COVID-19 and you had to quarantine. If your unemployment took months to post to your account, if you had to make the choice to stay home because you didn't have childcare because of school closings. So Build Back Better included a monetary support of $170 billion for affordable housing. $25 billion of that was allotted for rental assistance. It would have been one of the largest investments in affordable housing in American history. So COVID-19 is not over. My own son contracted COVID twice, which forced him to be out of work for weeks. And this pandemic is still raging through our nation. Build Back Better is a way to help families survive this pandemic. And we need assistance in Arkansas and across our nation to help keep children in their homes, to help mothers and fathers to find more meaningful work, and to sustain the quality of life in keeping families together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me get back to Ana Lilia. For decades now, the middle class, the working class has been struggling, and we have millions and millions of people living in abysmal poverty. And COVID has exacerbated all of those problems. What was bad is now even worse. Right here, where I'm in Burlington, Vermont, I'll never forget, a year ago or so, we had hundreds of cars, people lined up for emergency food packages distributed by the National Guard. And these are people who never in a million years would have believed they'd be in that position. People lost their health insurance, they lost their jobs. Ana Lilia, talk a little bit about what COVID has done to working families throughout this country.
I mean, just the bottom line of finding yourself without work or being forced to stay home. And at the same time, the pressures of rising housing costs, rising food costs, rising transportation costs, those double pressures on American families at the same time, you're finding yourself with the inability to have gainful employment and the pressure of rising costs. But here's a reality, Senator, that pain, that injustice existed before COVID, as you well know. I mean, listening to these incredible, leaders share their stories, what I'm hearing is, Robert's dad had the same struggle before COVID. Robert had that struggle before COVID. Chandria, Marthella, the pressures that American families are feeling, that injustice of working so hard and somehow still not making ends meet or not being able to thrive, it's had an impact, a deep impact across our communities for many generations. And yet again, we know the solutions. We know that investing in education, we know that investing in affordable housing, we know that investing in healthcare, we know that investing in infrastructure and making sure that those jobs are equitable, that there's access for women, for the formerly incarcerated, for all of our communities, that is the secret sauce to help those families, to help our families, and at the same time, lift our economy. And everyone benefits, including those billionaires. They do better when we have money to spend. So it's sometimes it's incredible that this argument has to continue, that we have to keep making it. Kudos to all of us, I guess, for not giving up on speaking truth and pointing out the very obvious, that the only way that our entire economy thrives is if we all have a part in it.
And I would just add to what Analulia said so well. I want everybody to know these are not radical ideas.
They're not.
All right. You think healthcare as a human right is a radical idea? It's not. It exists all over the world. Do you think making sure that working parents have the support that they need to raise their kids with dignity? You think that's a radical idea, guys? It is not a radical idea.
Absolutely not.
All over the world, people know that. And do you think that, controlling the cost of prescription drugs is radical? It's not. And by the way, when we do all of these things, including addressing climate change and transforming our energy system, you know what we also do? We create millions of good paying off in union jobs, good jobs at good wages, making this country a better place to live in. Instead of paying workers in childcare or in home health care starvation wages, often women of color, by the way, we will pay people decent wages, have better trained people, providing better services. It is a win-win situation. Mita, I want to get back to you, and we have done many live streams. We've never, I think, had somebody from Alaska, so we are delighted. I was in Alaska just once or twice. It is, I guess, what we call the last frontier in America, right?
Right. Well, you can call it the first frontier of climate change now.
Yes, that's right. How are people in Alaska responding to the you described the very visible changes you're seeing with your own eyes right now? And when we talk about climate change, they used to talk about it over millions of years. You're seeing it in your own lifetime,
Yes.
which is very, very frightening. All right, how are the people in Alaska responding to what they are seeing with their own eyes?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, we have this process of climate grief, and we also have a kind of a duality of experience because we have the larger urban areas and we have the rural areas. And our rural areas are directly dependent on the health of the environment for most of their food, most of their nutrition. and their traditional cultural activities. So we have extreme grief because these plants and animals and fish and birds we've lived with for well over 10,000 years. They're our relatives, they're our family. And we see unexplained mortality events on a regular basis. We are losing family members because rivers that have always been frozen in the middle of the winter are now open. Lakes are now open, and people are falling through or dying because of accidents related to these things. We have the destabilization of communities. And with the moving, they don't know if they're going to have to tear apart their community to move. And in Anchorage, like we have a lot of the amenities available to us, but that dependency on other places, with COVID, we were scared that our ships would break down or people would be too sick to bring in foods. All of our stores were out of toilet paper and milk and base necessities. And it's the scarcity that drove home that we have to act. It is required. We only have 2 senators and 1 congressman for 20% of the land mass in the United States. And it's required that other members of the Senate and Congress help to sustain Alaska because we are a part of this country. We're not something to be left behind or forgotten. We also make it unique as an Arctic nation. And so there is that duty to listen and to hear us and to help us transition well.
Thank you very much. And, what else is there? If we lose our planet, ain't much left else that we can lose, right? That's about it.
And people don't realize that the Arctic ice stabilized the temperature for the rest of the United States. So that's why all these cold fronts come down and sweep into the US. Like you actually need it.
All right, let me go from Alaska to Texas. Probably a little bit warmer down there. Robert,
Not much right now.
Well, it's 5 below zero here in Burlington right now, so it's probably a little warmer in Texas anyhow. Robert, you are not the only person in Texas who lacks health insurance. Is there a growing consciousness in the state that there's something wrong when your governor has not even accepted the expansion of Medicaid, let alone Medicare for all? Are people aware of the need to stand up and fight to guarantee healthcare as a human right? Are you seeing some of that taking place in Texas now?
I believe so. I mean, I had a mentor that has, really mentored me a lot. Her name is Sophia Sepulveda, and she has been leading, the charge down here for Medicare for All. She has been leading, leading marches every year for Medicare for All. I see when I go and knock on my neighbors' doors and talk to different people all around the neighborhood and city, I see everywhere, people really wanting to have healthcare, be a human right rather than a commodity, something that people make money from. It should be that if you get sick, you get healthcare, and it's so like grotesque, I guess you can say, to make money off of people's sickness and illness.
And Robert, that is exactly what this entire system is based on. That's what private insurance companies are for. It's not to provide quality care. It's to make as much money as they possibly can. So they're making a whole lot of money. Well, some 80 million Americans are uninsured or underinsured. So this struggle, in my view, the solution is a Medicare for all. It is understanding that the function of healthcare is not to make huge profits for the insurance companies or the drug companies, but to make sure that all of our people have quality healthcare. And the way to do that, in my view, is through Medicare for all. But thank you very much for the fight you're waging in Texas. And I know that is not easy. Let me get to Chandria. Chandria, you talked about taking your kids to work with you. What is the childcare situation like where you are? And what does it mean? Can parents find quality, affordable childcare? And what does it mean if you can't find that?
So they actually do have voucher programs here in Washington, D.C., where they do help D.C. families. However, during that particular time, my children are school-age children, so they're a little bit bigger. And so the daycare, they weren't that group. So basically when the pandemic hit, the schools went out, like the schools closed and we did virtual learning. I was in school for cosmetology, so I really could not take my children to school with me. So I found a daycare for them to go to. So in that time, I forgot what happened, but for an entire month, they could not return to the daycare. So it put me in a situation where it was like, okay, what am I supposed to do?
Right.
I did find another job where I did take the children to a salon because this was the same time where they weren't able to go back to the daycare, and they weren't allowed to go back to the school either. So I did have to take them to school, but they do have programs, but sometimes it is difficult for a lot of parents to really get that. Yes, it's difficult for some families, not all, but during that time when the pandemic first hit, it was difficult for a lot of people.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And it's an issue, childcare is an issue that we really do not talk about enough. Good quality childcare is terribly important for the children to get a good start in life so they'll do well in school and do well in life. It's obviously important for the parents as well. We have a situation where it is estimated 1 million women are not going to work, earning a living because of inadequate childcare facilities or no childcare facilities in their communities.
Senator,
Go ahead, Amanda. Go ahead.
Just putting on my former Women's Bureau hat and just and adding a point here, Senator, we lost 3 generations worth of gains for working women through COVID. When you look at the shrinkage of the number of women in the workforce, it was 3 generations worth. And why? Because so many could not find and afford childcare. And here's the thing, for myself, I was struggling to find not only someone that could help me with my children, but also someone that could help me with my elderly parents. I have a 95-year-old dad, a 78-year-old mother, trying to balance. I'm the sandwich generation. But when I was going out looking for help, these women who otherwise would want to be able to engage in the workforce, would want to be able to support their families, couldn't go out because they had their own children to care for. That lack of infrastructure hurts us across the board, whether you're managing your children, your parents, or again, just trying to find equity in our workforce.
Well stated and absolutely correct. And just in your own personal household, dealing with kids, dealing with elderly parents, you're running into, the home health care issue, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was willing to, my family, my sister and I, we were willing to pay what we could and advertised everywhere, but there was a shortage of workers. Right. Again, because if they can't afford childcare, they can't engage. I will say the saving grace with my parents is that they have Medicare. So at least I don't have to worry about their health care.
Okay. Marthella, Arkansas is a poor and struggling state. No question about it. How are people in Arkansas, working people, dealing with the many crises that they face and we face all over this country? Are they organizing? Are they fighting for justice? Are they demoralized? How do people in a poor state like Arkansas respond to where we're at today?
Senator Bernie Sanders, the majority of the people are demoralized. When you think about how there are programs that were put in place for rental assistance, for different things to help them to cope with the loss of jobs and being forced to be home because of the pandemic. And then when you go and apply for these programs, you face all of these obstructions that are put there by representatives of the state that don't want those programs to really flourish. You have the online requirements that are where the systems are difficult to maneuver through. You have all of these mounds of documentation that you have to bring forth to show that you need this assistance. You have the fact that the property owners are not even required to repair their property, and they can kick you out if you're late, or either just to be able to file paperwork that could cause you to become a criminal, to be thrown in jail, to because you can't pay your rent, to just to have to deal with all of that. It's really heartbreaking, and it's heavy. It's a heavy burden. And so even those that would want to step out and to fight against these atrocities that are happening in their communities and to them and to their families, they have to build up the ability to be brave to do it, and it's hard for them to do that. So organizations like the one that I'm a member of, Arkansas Community Organizations, and our organizers and our members, we go out and we try to encourage them as much as we can, and we try to assist them and to build up the power and the pride in them to say, hey, this may be a really hard, troubling time for you right now, but you can still do something. You can still come out. You can still let your voice be heard. You can share your stories. You can stand in front of these offices and protest and let them know, hey, we're out here. We need this assistance. We need your help. We need you to be more humane in dealing with us. Just because we come from these communities that you consider to be less than, don't mean that we are not important.
Good. Marthella raised an issue that is often not discussed enough, and that is you could have a program, and yet the bureaucratic hurdles to get into the program are such that many people get discouraged, or they can't fill out all of the forms, or they just throw up their hands in despair. I used to be the chairman of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs. And the truth is the VA has a number of good programs, but some of them are so bureaucratic that people just give up and don't take advantage of them. And we have got to simplify that process. We got to make these programs universal. Instead of spending half your life filling out forms, you should be entitled to the benefits that the government is offering, pure and simple. But I know Arkansas is a tough state to organize in. So I applaud very much, Marthella, the work that you were doing. And I want to mention something, picking up on a point that Marthella made about in tough times being able to stand up and fight back. Just a few days ago, we talked to workers in Colorado who work for, I believe, the largest grocery chain in the country. It's called Kroger's. And Kroger's is a grocery store owned by very wealthy people, paying its CEO some $20 million a year, doing phenomenally well, making all kinds of money during the pandemic. The union sat down with Kroger's to negotiate a contract. And what the company said is, yeah, we're making huge amounts of money, but we want to pay you even less, give you less health care. And the worker said, sorry, that ain't going to happen. And over 8,000 of those workers at the United Food and Commercial Workers went out on strike. They went out on strike for 10 days. And you know what happened at the end of 10 days? They won because the people in their community supported them, didn't go shopping at Kroger's. And they won significant wage increases and other benefits. And they did it because they stood together and they fought back. And that is the bottom line of everything. The guys on top have all of the money, they have the power, they own the media, they own much of the Congress. That's true. But at the end of the day, when working people stand together and have the courage to fight back, we're going to win these things. And I know it's hard in Arkansas. I know it's hard in Texas. I know it's hard in Alaska. It's hard all over this country. But if there was ever a moment in American history that we needed to stand up and fight back against the corporate greed that we are seeing today, this is that moment. So I just want to thank all of you from all across this country, from Texas to Arkansas to Alaska. Thank you all for the great work that you are doing. And let's keep going forward together. For the sake of our kids, for the sake of the planet, we have no alternative. Got to keep standing up and moving on and fighting. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Senator.